Over the past 25 years, literally thousands of guitarists and drummers have been influenced by the Shadows. Even before the Beatles, they'd had a string of #1 hits worldwide. During the recent New Zealand tour, we caught up with Shadows guitarist Hank B. Marvin. Apache, the first ever #1 for the Shadows. Hank B. Marvin, welcome to Shazam. Can I ask you what the B stands for?
Well, it's not Bridget. It actually stands for Brian.
Brian, we've both got the same middle name then. How about that? Apache, now, that went to #1. You also had another #1 after that. Something spoiled almost 3 in a row, didn't it? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, well, we've actually had in the UK anyway, 5 #1s altogether out of the 31 hit records we've had. But in 1963, we started the year off pretty well. We had Dance On at #1, then Foot Tapper followed it. And the third release that year was a thing called Atlantis, which was a pretty rapid climber. It got to #2 in the charts and stayed there for about 5 weeks. And I can't quite remember, I think it was a Helen Shapiro record kept it off #1, which was frustrating for us because it would have been the first time anyone had had 3 #1 records on a row in the UK. It hadn't been done before, and it's just one of those things.
You're celebrating 25 years in the industry, which not many people do. Is there a secret to that length of success?
I wish I knew, really, Philip. I think obviously there's some pointers we can look at. We were the first group to have any real big success that sustained, and I think talking to people who were fans and just people generally, we made a big impression on people's minds and hearts. I think, you know, people took to us as personalities as well as the music, and I think the combination of that created a situation where there were an awful lot of other young people who wanted then to start playing music in the way that we were playing, so they formed their own groups and went on perhaps to better things, some of them. But being the first, we set in motion a chain of events, I think culminating in a big group boom really in the 60s with like Beatles, the Stones and everything that's gone on from there. So I think that's all helped, plus the fact that obviously we were fortunate in getting a good choice of tunes, either things we'd written ourselves or that other people had written for us. So a good combination of the right material at the right time, and I think also from what, again, the feedback from fans, being able to do good shows. I know a lot of people are disappointed when they go to see artists on stage who don't perform very well. And we were always fortunate that we were able to do, apparently, good performances. So sounding the same on record as on stage? Yes. You sang on the first 2 singles that you released. What made you decide to turn into an instrumental band? Pure chance, really. We started off our recording contract career, independently of Cliff, as a singing group, really, much in the way that the Beatles were later on. We had a moderate success with our first 2 or 3 releases. We almost had a hit with the third. And we got into a situation where we weren't sure whether to go for another song or maybe even try an instrumental, because we had recorded a couple of instrumentals on Cliff's albums, funny enough. And a guy called Jerry Lorden worked with us on one of our tours in the early 60s, and he was a very good writer. He'd had a lot of successes as a writer, and he played us an instrumental he'd written. And we thought it was the most amazing thing we'd heard at that time. It was so different. We played it, we arranged it, played it to our recording producer, Norrie Paramore, who thought it was also wonderful, recorded it, and funnily enough, he wanted it to be the B-side, but he played it to his daughters. He had a great system whereby he'd play any of his productions to his young teenage daughters, and depending on the reaction, he'd go for it, and they all went mad about it, about Apache, not the other side, which he thought was the A-side. Yeah. So that became our A-side, and the response was immediate. You know, before it was even released, he said, look, I'm convinced this is a hit record, the buzz it's getting in the business. Yeah. So we found ourselves a manager, and that was our first hit, Apache. And you mentioned Cliff a few seconds ago. Yeah. Cliff was the first ever interview we had on Shazam a couple of years ago. He's got very fond memories of the old days. Well, I hope this is not the last interview you have on there. What was the situation of the meeting of Cliff? How did you meet him? Well, Bruce Welsh, fellow Shadow and myself, had come down to London from Newcastle upon Tyne in the northeast of England to try to get into the music business. And we played around coffee bars in London for around 6 months. And A day later, we went along to meet Cliff on the way to rehearsals, and he was having a fitting for his what became his famous pink jacket. And we sneered at each other for a few minutes, as teenagers tend to do, and then we had such a lot in common musically that we hit it off pretty quickly, and we went back to his mother's place in a small town called Shazam in Hertfordshire in England, where he lived in a council house, and we rehearsed in the front room. And we had a great afternoon rehearsing. I think even at that time in the rehearsals we realised Cliff really had something. You know, he was singing well, and he seemed to have a definite magnetism of some kind.
Well, they were the Drifters originally, and the original Drifters were my schoolmates. You know, they were people who were at school with me, and when we became professional, it was obvious that one or two of them weren't going to be good enough. So therefore, I had to find others, and I found Hank Marvin, and Bruce Welch. They were playing down in a club called the Two Eyes Coffee Bar, and I asked them to join me. They came on the first tour. They didn't play on the first 2 or 3 records. And while we were on the first tour, we met Jet Harris, we met Tony Meehan, and no, we didn't meet Tony Meehan at that time. Jet, Hank, and Bruce remembered Tony as being someone who'd gigged with them down in the club. So they said, "We got a great drummer," and they hooked him in, and that's how the Shadows came about.
So we did the first tour, which lasted 2 weeks, and he asked us to stay with them permanently, which we did, and Jet Harris joined at the end of that tour. And then Tony Meehan, who was replaced the first drummer, Terry Smart. Tony joined in January 1959, and that was the lineup for the first Shadows. Tony, of course, was replaced in 1961 in October by Brian Bennett, who's been with us ever since. In fact, Brian's really first trip abroad with us was here to New Zealand.
Oh, really?
61, yeah.
Do you still keep in contact with Cliff?
Yes, in fact, I played tennis with him just about 10 days ago. And this summer, in the UK, we're doing several reunion concerts together, just Cliff and the Shads, at the Wembley Arena. We do about 3 nights there, then we go to the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham, and we're doing anything from between 4 to 6 nights there.
So the Cliff and the Shadows are back together again?
Yeah, just for a couple of weeks in July.
You mentioned your trip to New Zealand, which was in 1961, was it?
Yes, October 61.
22 years ago. Something of a record. It's been a long time. Has the group's presentation and image changed very much since that first visit?
Presentation-wise, it's basically the same. In those days, if we were topping the bill doing a show without Cliff, we'd probably do maybe 30 minutes. That was what was expected. Nowadays, we do a whole show on our own, 2 hours. So obviously, it's extended. Naturally, with experience, hopefully it becomes an improvement. Today, the difference is today we carry a big lighting rig, which in those days you used whatever the lights were in a venue, which was usually on or off, you know, some of these places. We also travel a sound system, which creates a much better sound. We have a mixing engineer who can create a mix almost as if you're listening to a record.
So in all the string of hits that the Shadows have had, do you have a particular instrumental favourite?
Yes, a lot of them appeal a great deal to me, Philip, but there's one, in fact, we never made a single of it, but it's been an album track, and we used to do it on stage quite a bit. It was Fleetwood Mac ever had, Albatross. I think it's a beautiful piece of music, very evocative of seagulls, yachts, in fact, of this place we're sitting in.
All right, well, if you'll perform a little bit of it for us, thank you very much for coming on the programme, and good luck with the future of the Shadows.